He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. Yes, this applies to Santa Claus, but also Elf on the Shelf. I'm your host Emily, and today we're going to count down the top 10 dark Elf on the Shelf urban legends. Elf on the Shelf is a Christmas tradition where a special scout is sent to your home from the North Pole to encourage kids to behave themselves. There are 4 rules when it comes to this. 1. The kids cannot touch the elf. If they touch the elf, then the elf cannot fly back to the North Pole that night. 2. The elf does not move nor speak when the kids are awake. 3. The elf reports back to Santa at night when they fly back to the North Pole to let Santa know how the kids were that day. And 4. Be kind to the elf and others. Now, let's jump into these urban legends. Number 10. The elves are voodoo dolls. In one neighborhood, a lot of families who had an elf on the shelf said their elf went missing. Even if they replaced them, the elf would disappear again. All these families had been wondering where these elves had gone, until one day, when a boy from one of the houses was walking outside, he stopped in front of a quiet house on a corner because out of the corner of his eye, he saw a cat with one of the elves in its mouth. He was excited, thinking he found his family's elf, so he went and told his family. The family went to the house and they found that the door was open, so they decided to go in. The house was pretty empty, and when they called out, no one answered. As they reached one room, they discovered it was filled with a bunch of elves on the shelves. There were hundreds of them, and they all had pins and needles stuck in them. The family walked into the room and saw one elf sitting alone in a chair. The boy ran towards it, thinking it was his, and the family heard laughter behind them and an old man's voice saying, "So it works." Keep in mind, they were the only people in the house. So due to this, the family screamed and they left. Number 9. The elf can infiltrate your dreams. A young girl kept having dreams of where the elf would be the next day, and then it would come true. It started off as a fun game for her, and she started telling her younger sister that she knew where the elf was going to be the next day. Her sister didn't believe her, but she was right, day after day. Soon she realized that she wasn't seeing the future, but that the elf was controlling her dreams. Slowly, day by day, the elf moved closer and closer to her and her sister's rooms. The night before Christmas, she had a dream that the elf went into her little sister's room. She woke up after the dream, and in the middle of the night, she went to her sister's room to protect her. She got into her sister's bed and held her all night. But when she woke up, she wasn't holding her sister, but the elf. Turns out her sister disappeared, and they're pretty sure it had something to do with the elf. Number 8. The elf moves freely, even if it's not Christmas time. Obviously, the elf moves around the house each day in December leading up to Christmas. But what if it actually moved in the off-season? After Christmas, families put their elf back into storage with the rest of their Christmas decorations, but something happened to a family from Nevada. They had been using their elf for years, and they put their elf back in storage after Christmas time, but when they went back to get it the next year, it wasn't there. It was missing. They couldn't find it, but their kids were older and it seemed like a good time to stop doing Elf on the Shelf, so they didn't think much of it. Then, years passed, and when one of the family members was searching for something, they found the elf. It was just casually sitting on the rubber bin where it usually was before it was lost years ago. The elf stared at them, and it gave them an eerie feeling, but they put it in the living room anyway. That night, right before they fell asleep, they heard a voice say, "Not enough." Then, that morning when they woke up, the elf was gone, never to be seen again. Number 7. The elf's name is important. A rule with Elf on the Shelf is that the family must give their elf a name. Typically, these are silly names that people name after Christmas things like Snowflake or Twinkles. But you have to make sure that you stay away from certain names. Why? You could run the risk of a devilish possession. Names such as Lucifer, Bile, and Gorgo are big no-nos as they are Inferno names. Inferno names are names that are linked to anti-hero figures used in satanic rituals. If you ever give your elf one of these names or any others on the Inferno list, then you open the door for your elf to become possessed by a demon. Just because the door is open doesn't mean that just any demon will walk through it, however, you don't want to be giving them the option to. This is a happy time full of friends and family and most importantly, love. But if you're a demon, it's one of the worst times of year for you and you want to wreak havoc and ruin the fun. If a demon gets into your elf, there's no limit on the chaos it can cause, and it could stay for an unlimited amount of time. With that in mind, I'd stick to the silly Christmas names. Number 6. The elf misbehaves and blames it on the child. Like mentioned before with the demons, they want to create havoc. So why not create havoc and then blame it on poor little kids? A family sent their child Charlie to daycare, and the daycare had an elf on the shelf. Charlie told his parents the doll creeped him out, but the parents explained that it was all make-believe and there was nothing to be scared of. Instead of keeping the kids in line, they were misbehaving, or so it was thought. When the elf was out, there were more reports of toys being tossed around, and Charlie kept saying that the elf was doing it, along with all the other kids. The daycare staff told the parents about this behavior because they believed it was all the kids. It just kept getting increasingly worse, and the kids said the elf would move, blink, and even whisper to them. All the kids, though, were too scared to repeat what the elf said. Then, one day, a kid disappeared from the daycare without a trace, and the worker noticed that the elf was gone too. It was believed that the elf took the child, and Charlie's parents pulled him out of that daycare. Number 5. Real-life people are spying on you. As mentioned before, the whole point of the elf is to watch you and make sure you're behaving well so you'll get good gifts for Christmas. It watches your every move, and not just the child's, but every single person in the house, even the dog. It's believed that the elf will bring this information to Santa, but what if you're being watched for a different reason? A family in 2011 had an elf on the shelf for about 3 weeks until they noticed it wasn't a regular doll. This elf had a camera inside of it recording them and sending the footage to some sort of feed. The camera was dead when they found it, but they had no idea how long it had been recording them. This sparked the theory that Elf on the Shelf is a method for big corporations to get inside our homes and get information about us. We have Amazon Alexas to listen to us, so why not have a Christmas elf record us? People have gone further and theorized that the government is behind it, like some sort of Big Brother thing. It was never figured out who put the camera in there and where the footage was going, and I'm sure the family never got another elf. Number 4. Do not mistreat the elf, or else. Like the rules state, you cannot touch the elf. If you touch the elf loses all its magical powers. If by chance an elf is touched by accident, the child has to write an apology letter to Santa. Then, before bed, they have to sprinkle cinnamon around the elf and leave it overnight. If you do this, its magical abilities will return and the elf will go back to the way it was before. However, there is a legend that says if you hit, throw, or mistreat the elf in any way, instead of the elf losing its powers, you turn the elf into a force of evil. Like the urban legend of Krampus, where you are punished if you are naughty, the elf will do something similar, label you as a bad kid, and you will go on the naughty list. Now that you've mistreated the elf, it will go from nice and sweet to just plain evil and will make you pay for what you did. Instead of going back to the North Pole to report back to Santa in the night, it will sneak into your room and do what you did to it. It will torture you by slapping, hitting you, and overall mistreating you. Now, its only mission is to make you feel the pain that it felt. It wants revenge. It's said that this will happen every night leading up to Christmas when the elf would go away. And apparently, if you try to kill the elf or get rid of it, it will find its way back into your room at night and be even angrier. So whatever you do, do not harm the elf. Number 3. The elf could be a demon. Legend says there is one elf that isn't a real elf on the shelf. It's said to be a demon named Mormo who pretends to be an elf. Mormo is a spirit whose name in the past was invoked by mothers and nurses to frighten children to keep them from misbehaving. With that in mind, it makes sense why it would pretend to be an elf on the shelf. Now though, all this demon wants to do is kill. This legend started after a brutal murder took place where a man and a woman were killed in a way where police had an extremely hard time understanding it. When police arrived on the scene, there was blood everywhere and the couple were laying on the ground in the middle of the living room. There were no indications of a break-in and nothing was stolen. The first theory was it was a murder and then the other took their own life, but that didn't make sense. There had to be a third person involved. One thing that stood out to police though was the blood-splattered elf on a shelf positioned on their mantelpiece in full view of everything. The police never figured out who killed this couple, but people started speculating it was Mormo. The theory is every time you buy an elf on the shelf, you're taking a chance of it being Mormo. If it is Mormo though, it is said that you and your family will die in an unexplained way right before Christmas. Number 2. The story was created by a demon. It's said that this entire Elf on the Shelf story was actually created by a demon. The entire premise of Elf on the Shelf is a little creepy to begin with, but it's for Santa, so nothing can go bad, right? Well, what if it wasn't reporting back to Santa, but a demon? In 2008, a woman who had an elf on the shelf started to notice things going missing from her home during the Christmas season when her elf was out. First it was keys, then kitchenware, and it progressed to valuable items. She also started to notice that all of a sudden things started going wrong. This included newer appliances breaking and needing to be replaced, leaks happening, and issues with electricity. She had no idea why this was happening until she realized it all started happening when she brought the elf into her house. Since then, other people have reported things missing from their house right around Christmas time when they brought their elf out. It's said that things had gotten worse the longer the elf was in the house. There's a whole community who's convinced that these elves don't work for Santa, but a mischievous demon who encourages them to do these things. The goal of a demon to wreak havoc and create chaos in your home. Like, Christmas in general already isn't crazy, and a demon has to make it worse. Number 1. The elf is actually a child trapped inside. One legend says that the elf on the shelf isn't actually an elf, or wasn't always an elf. It is said that one year the naughty list was so full and so many children were misbehaving, so the North Pole deemed a method should be sent to all the children who had gone too far. It was determined that the North Pole wanted to make examples out of these children, so they turned them into an elf on the shelf, which they have to be for all of eternity. The idea was that the child and the elf would watch other children and make sure they behave and don't make the same mistakes they did. So yeah, not an elf, but a trapped soul of a naughty child in a plastic toy. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 dark elf on the shelf urban legends. These creep me out a lot, and let me tell you, I never want an elf on the shelf. I'm your host Emily, and I'll see you next time.